following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. Story 1. Mutant Encounters and Mysterious Rules. There were 3 of us heading into the dark Eastern European forests. My friend Dimitri, who was originally from the country and knew the language, his girlfriend Anna, and myself. Everything seemed mundane enough as we flew into the country and handed over our passports. There was no sign of the horrors waiting ahead. The first towns we encountered looked idyllic enough as we drove through them in a rental car. Isolated farmhouses with cows and chickens dotted the landscape. Plentiful fields of wheat, potatoes and corn stretched out on all sides of us. The black earth here was fertile, I knew, as we headed deeper into the radiation zone. However, the houses and farms all started to look abandoned and dilapidated, the fields barren and dead. Christ on a cracker, I muttered, more to myself than to my friends. This place looks like it suffered through the apocalypse. It did, Dimitri said grimly. A nuclear apocalypse. I feel like the biblical one is far more optimistic than the true apocalypse will be. In reality, there will be no rapture, no victory of light over darkness. If there is ever a World War III, every major city will be consumed by nuclear fire. It will throw buses and cars thousands of feet into the air, spilling out bodies onto the burning skies. Entire streets will collapse, trapping countless millions under the rubble. That's a cheerful thought, Anna commented, her dark blue eyes staring out the window. I saw the reflection of white eyes skittering through the brush outside, small animals that disappeared in front of the approaching roar of the engine. How far is it? I asked, feeling carsick and anxious. The winding roads here curved through countless hills. It reminded me of driving through parts of Northern California before, when I had retched out the window. Anna and Dimitri seemed unaffected, though I cursed my stomach, which was always turning traitorous towards me. It's a while. Man, Dimitri said, this country is huge. Probably another 3 or 4 hour drive, and then we have to start walking. Good thing we left before dawn, Anna said, stifling a yawn. She had a can of some cheap Russian Red Bull knockoff, some fluorescent green crap that smelled like chemicals, but she drank it as if it were the finest French wine. I gazed out at the dark forests that passed us on both sides, wondering what kind of sights lay ahead in this land of the damned. The sun rose early over the gently rolling hills and black earth of Ukraine, sending its rusty streaks of blood across the sky. The going had been easy so far, except for the constant car sickness I felt. I took a few pills of meclizine, wishing that I could have smuggled some weed gummies through customs. But here, cannabis was illegal, and I was not eager to see the inside of an Eastern European prison, where lunatics like the 3 guys, 1 hammer maniacs and the chessboard killer lived in hellish conditions. Holy shit, would you look at that? Dimitri said with awe and wonder oozing from his voice as the car braked abruptly. I looked up quickly, my stomach doing flips, but what I saw laying across the road instantly brought me back to the moment. Dimitri pointed a tattooed hand at the sight. Is that real? Anna asked. I could only shake my head as we all stared at the dead bear that was laying across the cracked road, its dead eyes staring straight through us. I noticed immediately that the bear had extra paws on its arms. Blood-stained claws jutted sharply out of its 4 paws, each seeming to have 7 fingers. Its feet looked stunted and twisted, like the roots of a tree. An extra arm stuck out of the front of its chest, a pale, white fleshy growth emerging from its sternum. The mutated limb looked malformed and boneless, causing a sense of revulsion to rise up as I gazed on it. It flopped gently in the heavy wind that swirled down the surrounding hills. "Well, I guess the rumors are true," Dimitri said slowly, his eyes as wide and excited as a child. "Can you imagine what other kinds of things must be lurking in these forests? This is going to make a really awesome documentary." Anna nodded, playing with a small, handheld digital camera she took everywhere with her. She wanted to make a video that would finally go viral on the internet and help her gain some recognition for her work. "I'm going to record everything, including this," she said excitedly, brushing a lock of blonde hair behind her ear as she opened the door of the car. Dawn had risen overhead, radiating the first warm rays of a bright summer day. After a long moment, I followed her out. Dimitri stood at her side, his dark eyes wide. He ran a trembling hand over his shaved head as he looked down at the enormous bear. Anna zoomed in with the camera, kneeling down before the still beast. Her finely formed fingers shook with excitement as she drew within inches of the corpse. I wondered how the bear had died, as I didn't see any signs of injuries on the creature's body. The next moment, I saw it blink. I backpedaled away, giving a hoarse, guttural shout of warning. Anna was busy staring at the screen of the digital camera, scanning it across the bear's extra fingers and limbs. But the panic that swept over Dimitri's face showed me that he, too, had seen it. He grabbed Anna's arm, dragging her back with sudden fury. She stumbled, her legs crossing under her. She crashed into him, and they fell back together. A moment later, the bear came to life, its bones cracking as it twisted its head to look at the three of us. It swiped a mutated paw at the place where Anna's face had been only a moment before. I heard the sharp claws slice through the air like switchblades. The bear's head ratcheted over to glare at us. It gnashed its teeth as silver streams of saliva flew from its shaking head. With a primal roar, it leapt off the ground. I turned to run back to the safety of the car, but I nearly tripped when a pale figure streaked out of the forest right in front of me. It looked like something conjured up in a nightmare. It was naked and bloated, its skin white with bulging, pink cheeks. It looked to have a combination of human and pig features, and yet it ran upright like a person. Its irises were blood red, its pupils huge and excited. Its beady eyes flicked over to Anna, and a low, satisfied growl erupted from its wide throat. I watched the muscles work furiously in its porcine body as it sprinted towards her. Before either Dimitri or I could react, the pig thing grabbed Anna around the neck, its sharp, black fingers digging deeply into her skin. She squealed like a strangled rabbit as it dragged her away into the dark Ukrainian forests. Its pink lips pulled back in an excited grimace, revealing the sharp fangs underneath. I heard its guttural growls fade away rapidly. It sprinted much faster than a person, its hooves slamming the ground over and over at a superhuman speed. "Hey!" Dimitri called excitedly, taking a step forward. "What do you—" A giant bear paw with too many gleaming claws smacked his leg out from under him, sending him flying. I only stood there, shell-shocked and amazed, as Anna disappeared into the trees. A single moment later, the bear rose to its full height, roaring at us. Streams of spit flew from its mouth as its rancid breath washed over us. Breath that emanated a smell like roadkill and infection. I put my hands up, flinching, expecting a blow that never came. When I looked up, the bear had gone back on all fours. It ran in the path the pig creature had gone, its white, boneless extra limb hanging limply from its chest. "What the fuck?" Dimitri cried on the ground, rocking back and forth. I came back to life, running over to his side. I saw deep gouge marks sliced through his blue jeans. Bright streams of blood lazily dripped from the claw marks on his left leg. "We need to get help," I cried, shaking him. His eyes looked far away and confused, as if he didn't fully realize what was happening. "We need to go back and get the police." "The police?" he asked, laughing. "The police here won't do anything. You think they're going to travel out into the radioactivity zone just for a missing person?" He shook his head grimly before reaching out a hand to me. "Help me up. There's a first aid kit in the car." We need to bandage this up. Then we're going after Anna. We had no way to call for help. The phones this far out in Chernobyl didn't work, and there were never any cell phone towers built in the silent land. After Dmitri had disinfected and bandaged his legs, he rummaged through the trunk, looking for weapons. "God damn, there's nothing good here," he said despondently. "Some bear mace, some knives. What good is any of that going to do against these mutated monsters? We need an AK-47. I nodded in agreement. "Too bad we're not in the US," I said. "The only guns you're going to get around here are the ones you take off the bodies of Russian soldiers." "Yeah, if only," he muttered sadly, handing me a large folding knife. "We have 1 canister of bear mace, 3 knives and a tire iron. Not exactly an arsenal. I really didn't want to go into those dark woods, but thinking of Anna being tortured or murdered made me feel sick and weak. I shook my head, mentally torn. "Here, take the bear mace. 2, I'll take the tire iron and a knife," he continued, forcing the black canister into my numb fingers. "You ready for this?" "Absolutely not," I said. "I think we should try to find help. If we both go out there and get slaughtered, no one will ever find Anna." "The nearest town is 2 hours west of here," he responded icily. "By the time we get help, her trail will have gone cold. It will take at least 5 or 6 hours to get any rescue out here. No, we need to do this, and we need to do it now. If you don't want to come..." "I'll come," I said grimly, my heart pounding. "Fuck it." Dmitri had a sad history. As a child living in Ukraine, he had been kidnapped by an insane neighbor and kept in a dirt pit outside for weeks, wallowing in his own piss and shit, slowly starving. He said the man would throw down a stale crust of bread or a rice cake into the mud and human waste every few days. Dmitri would pull the food out, wipe off the feces and eat it. I shuddered, remembering the horror stories he had told me. I knew he had a personal reason for making sure Anna was not subjected to the same endless suffering, even if it meant his own death. The bear and the pig creature had left a clear trail of broken brush and snapped twigs snaking through the forest. Side by side, we moved cautiously ahead, constantly checking our backs, but we saw no signs of movement and heard nothing. Up ahead, the trees abruptly opened up, letting golden sunlight stream down. Blinking quickly, we left the forest behind. We walked out into a field in the middle of a valley surrounded by tall, dark hills. Grass and weeds rippled in waves as the wind swept past us. Formed in a semicircle in front of us, human skeletons lay endlessly dreaming. They stared up into the vast blue sky with grinning skulls and empty sockets. Some still had putrefying strips of flesh and ligaments clinging to the bones. Animals had scattered some of the bodies, but others lay complete, like corpses in a tomb. Human skulls, leg bones and arm bones lay scattered haphazardly across the field, their surfaces yellowed and cracked with age. It looked like a bone orchard. "What are we looking at right now?" I whispered, furtively glancing around at the field of bones. An insane part of my mind wondered if they might rise from the dead and come after us. Compared to what we had already seen in this place of nightmares, it didn't seem that far-fetched. "Dead bodies," Dmitri said grimly. "Victims of the nuclear accident." I asked. He shook his head, pointing at some of the fresher corpses nearby. Their throats looked like they had been ripped out, the bones of their necks showing deep bite marks. The one nearest us had its skeletal fingers wrapped around a glass bottle with a piece of paper rolled inside and a cork inserted into the top. I knelt down, prying the fingers back with soft, cracking noises. I uncorked it and took out the paper. It felt thick in my hands, like some kind of handcrafted paper from the old days. The cursive flowing across the sheet looked like it had been written in a quill pen with actual ink. In confusion, I read the letter aloud. "Rules to survive in the Hellskin Nature Preserve. 1. The cult known as the Golden Butchers has been kidnapping women to breed them with the pig creatures. They worship the offspring that result from these unions as gods. If a member of your group gets taken, We will find them in the living farm at the end of the forest. 2. If you encounter Mr. Welcome, the enormous pig god with the eyes on his forehead, you must not let him touch you. 3. The red snakes can only see while you're moving. If you encounter them, stay still. Don't even breathe. Breeding women with pig creatures? Dimitri cried, horror washing over his face. We need to find her. But where do we even start? I looked through the field, trying to see any sign of tracks, but it looked like hundreds of animals had gone through this field recently. Paths of tall, crushed grass crisscrossed the enormous length of it, some of them worn down to black dirt and stones. I just shook my head, having no idea. A distant scream rolled its way down the surrounding hills. It came from our left and sounded very much like Anna. Dimitri's eyes turned cold. Without looking back at me, he started frantically running towards the sound. It faded away within seconds. "Wait up!" I cried, sprinting as fast as I could. His freshly shaved head gleamed as he disappeared into the trees. Gripping the open buck knife in my hand, my knuckles white with tension and fear, I followed after him. We wandered for hours through the woods, never hearing a second scream to guide our path. We both hoped that we were going in the right direction. A small deer trail winding through the brush opened up, heading up rocky hills and clear streams of water. Sweating and nervous, we traveled for miles and miles, rarely talking. A few times, I tried to get Dimitri to slow down. "How do you know you're going in the right direction?" I asked. "We've been walking this trail for 5 hours and haven't seen a thing." This was the direction the scream came from, he said weakly. Where else would they go? They would want to travel quickly with a hostage. They would take a trail. I didn't point out that there may be other trails, that we had absolutely no idea where we were going. As we reached the peak of a mountain, I pulled a small, portable Geiger counter we had taken along for the trip. The radioactivity here was high, much higher than normal background radiation. I didn't know how far we were from the nuclear power plant at the center of all this, but at a certain point, it would become too dangerous to keep moving forward. Dimitri was next to me, chugging a bottle of water when a shriek rang out below us. It sounded almost animalistic, but had a strange, electronic distortion, amplified to an ear-splitting cacophony. It echoed through the trees. Much quieter roars answered from the forests all around us in response. The cries of bears and other predators. These sounded much closer. However, psst, a pile of thick ferns said to my left, shaking suddenly. In Ukrainian, the ferns continued by whispering, "Hey, you!" I jumped, swinging the knife in the direction of the brush, watching the blade shake wildly in my hand as fresh waves of adrenaline surged through my body. Dimitri was by my side, his eyes wide and wild. He glanced over at me, nodding. He had the tire iron raised like a tennis racket, ready to strike. A moment later, a little boy crawled out. He was scarecrow thin, his face smudged with dirt and filth, his dark eyes sunken and lifeless deep inside his small head. He had black hair and a nose like a little twisted lump in the center of his face. It seemed like it had been repeatedly broken. He didn't look older than 10, but he looked so emaciated that it was impossible to say. The rags and tatters he wore barely covered his body, and the boy was almost in his Genesis suit. "Come out," I said grimly. Dimitri's eyes bulged from his head. "Don't kill me." "Please," the boy whispered in a cracked, choked voice, his accent giving all his words a guttural tone. "Take me out of here. My mom and dad brought me here. They were part of the Golden Butchers, but a couple months ago, they got sick and died from all the poison in the water and food." "Who are you?" "Kid," Dimitri said, reaching down and pulling him up to his feet. I watched the boy closely, the bear mace in one hand and the knife in the other, looking for any sign of sudden violence or betrayal. "My name is Philip. I come from the farm," he said, pointing vaguely towards the tallest peak in the area. "You can't see it from here, but it's over there." Dimitri kneeled down until he was eye to eye with Philip. "Can you take us there?" he said. Philip's eyes teared up. but he slowly nodded. "If you will take me with you when you leave, I'll show you," he said, crying now. "But it is a horrible place. It is the place of Mr. Welcome." Philip guided us to the living farm, saving us a great deal of time. He navigated the forest like an experienced hiker, seeming to know the entire area from the smallest clues, a split, fallen tree, or a tree with a whirl like an eye, or a sudden curve in a babbling brook. It saved us a great deal of time wandering through the woods, where everything looked exactly the same to me. "There," he said, pointing through a break in the trees to the farm. The entire top of the hill was cleared of trees and brush. In its place stood a nightmare. The farm was the closest place to hell I've ever seen. The top of the living building peeked over the tall trees surrounding it. It had something like a bell tower on the top of it, almost like a church might have. But instead of a bell, it had an enormous, bloodshot eye. The eye had an iris as red as a dismembered heart. Its pupil was dilated and insane. From here, the eye looked to be about the size of a church bell and had no eyelids. Strange white filaments like those of a slime mold surrounded it, trailing down into the building. I wondered if this was the optic nerve for the great, staring eye. The rest of the building was as black as eternity, windowless and imposing. It had a brutalist architecture, all sharp angles and steep slopes. I watched the building and the eye closely. To my horror, I realized that the entire thing was alive somehow. The eye constantly spun in its place, staring out over the surrounding hills like the eye of Sauron. The building constantly breathed. "Welcome," a hushed, distorted voice cried. The words seemed to come from the breathing and living walls of the farm itself. "Welcome. Welcome. What the fuck is this, kid?" Dimitri whispered hoarsely. "Where's Anna?" Philip shook his head sadly. "She's inside with the other breeders," he said, the fear and terror evident on his face. "They keep them chained in cages or bound in the basement until the time for the ritual comes." "And when is that?" I asked. He looked up at the sky and the fading light. We had somehow wasted nearly an entire day already. Night was coming, and we hadn't even seen Anna yet. "At sunset," he responded. Dimitri nearly jumped up at that. "Sunset? That's almost here! We need to go now!" he cried. I almost wanted to laugh. "What are you going to do? Stab that enormous building with your knife?" I whispered. "We need a plan. Maybe we can burn it down, or..." But my words were cut off by the roaring of the building. Its scream echoed over the hills. It was immediately answered by countless others, including one that came only a few dozen feet behind us. I grabbed Dimitri's shoulder, my panicked eyes flicking in that direction. "There's something," I started to say when the brush cracked under a heavy weight. Looking up, I saw something horrible stalking us from behind. It looked like a pig, walking on all fours with a fat, bloated body, but it was the size of an SUV. Its eyes were like the eye in the building, blood red and dilated. All over its body, hundreds of sharp teeth grew out of its skin, covering the pink flesh like tumors. The creature almost looked like a porcupine with all the sharp points of fangs projecting from its body. For a moment, its eyes widened as we stared at each other. They instantly narrowed as the pig roared again and gave chase. It gnashed its teeth, opening and closing its mouth in a frenzy of bloodlust. In its mouth, too, the teeth grew wild. Hundreds of razor-sharp teeth of different sizes grew from its gums, tongue and lips. "Run!" I cried, grabbing Philip's arm and hauling him off the ground. The boy had a natural survivor's instincts and immediately started running by my side, away from the approaching creature. We broke out into the massive clearing where the living farm stood. I saw that the building had only a single door in and out, a black barn door that stood wide open. I heard Dimitri's feet pounding the ground behind me. The heavy thuds of the approaching creature drew louder by the second. "In the barn!" I cried, not having time to think. It was the only possible place of safety here. I sprinted faster than I ever had before towards those doors, as if they were entrance to paradise itself. Without slowing, I ran into the building, trying to slam one of the doors shut behind me. Dimitri grabbed the other. With the creature only seconds away, they started swinging shut. Philip's small body pressed against my leg as he came forward, using his meager strength to help me. The door was extremely heavy and hard to move. The building itself looked like it was 6 or 7 stories tall, and the doors to the barn nearly a third of that height. With a tortured creak, they slammed shut. A single breath later, something heavy thudded against the other sides, as if it had been hit by a battering ram. But the door held. Quickly, Dimitri and I grabbed a large board leaning against the wall and stuffed it into the brackets on both sides of the door, locking it from the inside. I noticed how cool and dark it was in here, as if I had walked into a cave. I turned, taking in the interior of the living farm for the first time. At that moment, I had to repress a scream welling up in my throat. Hundreds of imprisoned women both lined both sides of the barn. They were stacked one on top of another like prison cells, wearing filthy, blood-stained rags. Most of them looked silently down on us with dead, haunted eyes. I noticed the majority were in their 20s or 30s, but their eyes looked centuries old. Along the back wall, an enormous pig lined the wall, positioned like Jesus on the cross. It stood as tall as the barn itself. Extra eyes covered its face, a dozen of them positioned all over its cheeks and forehead. From the top of its head, I saw white filaments rising up into the bell tower, its many blood-red eyes focused on us, as still as death. "Welcome," it hissed. "Welcome." Its limbs were chained to the wall, enormous rusted links intertwined around its body, preventing Mr. Welcome from moving. "Anna," Dimitri cried. Looking around frantically, there was no one else here that I could see except for Mr. Welcome and all the hostages. "Anna, where are you?" "Don't scream," Philip said in a tiny, fear-choked voice. "Please, don't scream." But it was too late. As Dimitri's last words faded, trapdoors built into the black floor of the barn sprung open. Dozens of mutated bears and pig creatures crept out, their predatory eyes scanning us with hunger and anger. "Fuck," Dimitri cried, running back to the door at my side. Frantically, the three of us pulled the board up and dropped it to the fleshy floor with a clatter, as hisses and growls erupted all around us, and the predators creeped forwards towards us in a semicircle. The barn door flew open. It was night now, the darkness creeping in like a descending curtain. No pig creatures awaited us on the other side, but something worse seemed to be creeping out of the forest. I saw snakes the color of clotted blood slithering ahead. Each one was the size of a tractor trailer, yet they made very little noise. An occasional hiss would rip its way through the air, but they hunted silently. As I stood in the field in front of the barn, a no-man's land of hellish proportions, the certainty of death fell over my heart like grasping skeletal hands. I looked down at the little boy sadly. He gave me a faint smile, even though his eyes were terrified. "I think we're fucked," Dimitri whispered by my side. I only nodded. But at that moment, I remembered the rules, and an idea came to me. "Just stay still," I said. "Don't even breathe." Philip and Dimitri looked at me strangely. Then recognition came over their eyes. Dimitri only nodded, and then we all played statue. The predators from the barn were only 30 feet behind us by now, crouched down and hunting us like a cat with a mouse. Yet the snakes also closed in, their black, slitted eyes gleaming with a reptilian coldness as the mutated bears and pig creatures leaned down to pounce. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. I felt a sudden rush of air all around me. The snakes flitted forward in a blur, their massive jaws unhinging. 2 fangs swiveled out like switchblades, fangs big enough to impale a police car. Drops of clear venom fell lazily from the ends. Keeping my eyes closed, afraid to even breathe or blink, I listened as the sounds of tearing flesh and screaming animals resonated all around me. After about 30 seconds of this, everything went deathly silent. I don't know how long we stood there like statues, but eventually, Someone touched my shoulder. I opened my eyes, unbelieving. Dimitri stared at me intently. "They're all gone," he whispered. "All except Mr. Welcome. It's now or never." I nodded, and together we moved into the farm. The trapdoors still lay open. I could hear very faint sobbing coming from under the building. Dimitri was afraid to make a sound. Together, the three of us went down to investigate. We found a dark basement covered in hay. Torture tools covered the walls. Iron maidens, brazen bulls, crosses, and an entire universe of whips, saws, grinders, pliers, razor wire, and other blood-stained tools of the trade. In the corner, we saw Anna, her hands tied to the wall. More rope bound her feet and legs. We ran forward. When Anna saw Dimitri, she collapsed into a nervous wreck. "Oh my God. You came. Please, get me out of here. Right now," she whispered. "They're coming. The ritual will start soon." Without a word, we started cutting the ropes, freeing her quickly. "We need to be as quiet as possible," I told Anna. "We can all get out of here. Let's go." As we ascended from the basement back to the main floor of the living farm, the repetitive, metallic voice of Mr. Welcome kept repeating the same insane mantra. "Welcome," it said. "Welcome," once the four of us were all together. However, it changed. "Welcome, thieves," it hissed, its voice deepening and turning into a demonic gurgle. "That is my breeder. You will have to find out what happens to thieves." I could only imagine all those blood-stained tools in the basement, and I shuddered. Mr. Welcome inhaled deeply, his massive, fleshy body ballooning. With a predatory roar, he ripped the chains out of the wall of the living building. Orange pus and dark, clotted blood dripped from the holes. The barn breathed faster and deeper, the broken walls vibrating and shimmering as new life and pain flowed into them. Mr. Welcome started moving towards us like a grinding juggernaut, walking on two legs like some sort of pig god. His many lidless eyes never looked away from us. The frayed optic nerves leading to the bell tower broke with a sound like snapping rubber bands. Dimitri looked at me with great sadness in his eyes. "Get away," he whispered. "I'll distract it. Just get Anna home, no matter what." Before I could respond, he ran forwards towards the abomination, the small, useless knife raised in one hand. Mr. Welcome saw him coming. He tried to swipe at Dimitri with a sharp, black hoof, but Dimitri ducked. Running around the back of him, he gave a battle cry and started stabbing the monster in the back of the leg, which probably hurt it about as much as a toothpick. But it provided a distraction. This time, Mr. Welcome spun his whole body, falling back to all four legs to deal with this nuisance. He used his massive snout to smack Dimitri hard, sending him flying across the barn. He hit the wall with a bone-shattering thud. Dimitri's skin immediately started to blacken, as if he were being burned alive. His eyes melted out of his face as he screamed, clawing at the dying patches of necrotic tissue spreading across his body. Within a few seconds, his screams faded to agonized groans. He tried to crawl back towards us as he died.
"Run!"
I screamed, grabbing Anna's hand and forcing her to sprint by my side. Philip was already one step ahead of us, frantically trying to reach the shelter of the forest. I heard the ground shake behind me as Mr. Welcome drew near, moving much faster than we could ever hope to go. I knew we would never make it. "Keep going, no matter what," I yelled at Philip and Anna. They kept running, the animal instinct to survive now foremost in their minds. I had to suppress mine. I turned to face the creature, the evil pig god known as Mr. Welcome. In hindsight, I don't know if God or some divine power had interceded, but the bear mace was probably one of the few items that could have saved us at that moment. Mr. Welcome had many eyes, and now that he was running on all four paws, his face was within reach. As my heart palpitated wildly, I raised the bear mace and sprayed at his dozen eyes. He didn't slow, and I had to jump to the side to keep from being trampled. The air whooshed past me as if a subway car had gone by. But a moment later, Mr. Welcome gave a roar, and not one of anger and hunger. This was a roar of pain and uncertainty. Blinded, Mr. Welcome frantically started running in circles, knocking down huge swathes of trees. The ear-splitting racket as he pulled the forest apart crashed over the surrounding landscape. Without a moment of hesitation, I turned to follow Philip and Anna back to the car. We told the police about the barn and all the hostages, but they claimed they couldn't find it, and we never heard anything more about it. Looking back on the experience, I now know why Chernobyl is a restricted zone, and it isn't just because of the radioactivity. There are some things that hide under the surface. After all, things that grow in the dark, rotted places where no eyes roam. Story 2. Lost Boy. I was doing the dishes when my son told me that he'd made a new friend. He tugged on my pant leg and asked me if his new friend could come inside. We'd just moved into a quiet, suburban neighborhood in Minnesota, and I remember being happy that Atticus was already meeting people, so I went to the front door, expecting to meet a neighborhood boy. There was nothing, just an empty screen door opening up to a cool spring morning. I looked quizzically down at my son, who was still beaming with pride and excitement at the prospect of an afternoon playing with his new buddy. "His name's Jeb. Can he come in?" "Buddy, there's nobody there," I said to him. Attie's face immediately pulled down in an undignified frown. "He's right there," Atticus pouted. My grin only irritated him further. "He is, though," Atticus insisted. I humored him. Nothing. Just balmy sunlight streaming into our house and various bugs pelting themselves against the screen trying to get in. I assumed that Atticus had made a friend, as in literally made himself an imaginary friend. I tried not to show any disappointment because I've heard that it's completely normal behavior for a 7-year-old to do things like this. I made a mental note to be a better dad and take him to the playground more often. "All right, buddy. Well, I can't see him. You say his name is Jeb?" "Yeah." "He's hurt. Can he come inside to play?" That last comment made my skin itch, and I felt troubled. Hurt? A gloom settled around my corridor, and the sunny front yard felt threatening despite blossoming dogwood trees and a sky filled with puffy cumulus clouds. I chastised myself for being afraid of my son's imagination, but Atticus declaring that his invisible friend was hurt made me start a little bit. I eased down into my chair so that we could talk eye to eye. "Why do you say he's hurt?" Atticus was frustrated that I couldn't understand such an obvious concept. "Because his head is all wrong, and he's red," he huffed. He pointed at the screen door. I felt like I'd swallowed a rock. "Can Jeb come in, please?" "No, buddy. Tell Jeb to go home. Maybe some other time." Atticus was distraught by this and let me know in no uncertain terms that he was displeased and that I was a terrible father. After his time out, we were able to recoup the day with Legos. When my wife came home, I told her, almost, all about Atticus's new friend, Jeb. Obviously, I left out that one singular detail. I wrote it off as Attie's overactive imagination and made a note to read more age-appropriate books to him in the future. Maybe something in Watership Down had conjured Jeb. I knew that this would be a non-starter, as both Atticus and I really liked Watership Down. "Spooky," Christine said non-committally. "That's it? Spooky." Christine shrugged. "I mean, I don't know what else to say. It's spooky, and he's always been a little strange that way. Do you remember when he was a baby, and he was always smiling at that same corner of the old house?" I did remember. Christine never admitted it, but I had always thought that Attie's little preoccupation with that singular corner of the guest bedroom might have had something to do with our expedited move. I'm not normally prone to fearing ghosts and ghoulies, but I could remember many dark, early mornings in the old house where I would feel truly unsettled. I remember trying to feed Atticus, and he wouldn't want the bottle because he would be staring wide-eyed at the corner of the room and smiling. As much as I had tried to attribute that to some weird little quirk in my son, It's not a pleasant thing to experience in the loneliest hours of the night. What's worse is that when Atticus started talking, he started to fear that corner. I remember him wailing, "No," pitifully and burying his face in my arms, trying to hide from whatever he saw there. I never told Christine this, but one time I asked him what was wrong, and a much younger Atty told me that he didn't think the man's smile was a nice smile. I also never told Christine about the time that Atty saw a picture of a skull in an old history book, and Atty had plopped his little finger on the picture and beamed just like the man in the corner. Yes, vaguely. I lied, but that's just Atty's imagination. Smart kids are like that. Well, all I'm saying is that Atticus can be spooky sometimes. It's probably just one more creepy phase of his because you, she pointed playfully, won't stop reading him scary stories. MR, James helps him sleep. MR, James helps everyone sleep. It's not like I'm reading him Jack Ketchum. She gave me a look suggesting that I was being pedantic. I knew she was right, and resolved to concede that later, and also to read him some Narnia for a little while. So, should we just ignore Jeb for now? I asked Christine. She nodded. Yeah, but make sure that you don't ever say that he can come inside. Just in case? I finished. Just in case. She nodded prudently. Atticus woke us up that night and asked once again if Jeb could come inside to play. Can he please? He's crying and he says he's lost. Under no circumstances. Buddy, go back to sleep. I grunted into my pillow. Atticus plodded to my side of the bed and poked me lightly. I can't sleep. He won't stop crying and he's really loud. I cocked an eyebrow in reply, and he knew to drop it. I rolled out of bed and plucked him up in my arms. Come on, bud. We'll draw the curtains and put on a noisemaker or something. I slung him over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes, a way he's loved being carried since he was a baby, and took him into the hallway. Normally, Atticus would chuckle softly while I carried him, but tonight I could feel him shaking. By the time I had him back into his bedroom, he was nearly inconsolable. Atty loves his room. It's filled with pictures of astronauts and rocket ships, and he has those cheap glow-in-the-dark stars and planets on every surface in the room. He even made me arrange them into familiar constellations, which he could tell you the names of, but I cannot. To me, it's the bedroom I would have wanted for myself as a kid. But as I tucked him into bed, he couldn't stop staring wide-eyed at the narrow band of window which was visible from behind his solar system curtains. The room was cold too, and by that I mean it felt like being outside on a winter night. I tried to ignore this. "You're okay, buddy," I said consolingly, and I moved to shut his curtains. I stopped briefly. The edges of his window were lined in a jagged layer of frost. It was a warm May night outside. There was positively no reason why there should be a frost. I grimaced and watched the layer of frost creep across the window pane like an infection. I felt that same gloomy dread that I had felt earlier in the afternoon, and I turned to look at my son. His eyes were wide and wet in the dim light from his nightlight. "Atticus," I said haltingly, "are you afraid of Jeb?" Atty nodded silent agreement. I hastily shut the window curtain and knelt by his bedside. He calmed down a little, enough for me to ask him, "Why, buddy? I thought Jeb was your friend." Atty tried to burrow into his blankets. "I think Jeb is getting mad at me," he whimpered. I pressed my mouth into a flat line and looked at the window again. There was nothing for a few moments then. From behind the closed curtain came a long, slow whistle. It was a pathetic and mournful sound, and unsteady as if the whistler were only just learning. It came breathy and sharp from just outside. It was the sad keening of something lost and suffering. I turned back to Atticus. "That Jeb?" My son nodded and fresh tears welled up in his eyes. His words from earlier came back to me. "His head is all wrong, and he's red." "All right, stay with us tonight, but let's not make a habit of this." The next day that I discovered that Jeb was real. As I was rolling my trash down the driveway, my neighbor, Dan, came huffing up to meet me in the street. Dan was a typical suburban husband and father. No judgment. So am I. and I saw no reason why the two of us shouldn't have been friends, except that he was insufferably nosy and rather grim. He stayed up most nights reading the police blotter and generally trying to absorb as much terrible information about our little city as he could. Then he would find neighbors and bemoan the state of his town. "Jack, did you hear the news?" He waved excitedly. I now know that whenever Dan gets very animated in the morning, that something terrible has happened. I let my garbage can thud into place and waited politely to hear about the latest awful thing. The Kroger was robbed. His eyes lit up. "Terrific," I said flatly. "Town's kinda going to shit," he murmured. "Gets worse every year." He shook his head. "It never used to be like this." I nodded an apology. "Suppose not," I said. "Anyone die?" He usually only bothered to tell me about these things if someone was killed. Dan shook his head. "Not in that one. But did you hear about the kid?" That piqued my interest a little bit. I asked, even though I didn't want to. Kid?" Dan shook his head in disbelief. "Kid was riding his bike and got crushed by a drunk driver. It happened at 2 in the afternoon. Who's drunk at 2 in the afternoon?" "Lots of people." "Oh." And then I asked the question that I didn't want to know the answer to. "Do you know the kid's name?" Dan blinked, surprised that I'd asked. "John?" "I'm pretty sure it was John something." "Jeb?" His eyes rounded. "Yes." "Oh." "You already knew." "Messed up, right? Killed by a drunk driver at 2 in the afternoon. 3 blocks from our house. 2 in the afternoon. Hey, you okay? You look sick." "I'm fine. I'm gonna run back inside." I turned unsteadily and walked back inside with leaden feet. "Thanks for the news, as always." A cursory internet search revealed that indeed, a young boy had been crushed by a drunk driver yesterday afternoon. I tried to remember exactly when Atticus had first spoken to me about Jeb, but it was hazy. When I opened the link to read the entire article, I almost retched. The article displayed the mutilated face of a young boy. The entire right side of his face looked like it had been crushed in by a terrible force, so that all the structure had completely gone out of it, so that it looked like a wet bag of raw meat and hair. His bloodied right eye peered dolefully out from where I thought his cheek should have been, and his mouth was torn into a lipless grimace where the road had burned off the lower half of his face. Jeb's left eye, however, stared out at the viewer with twinkling menace and intelligence. In that moment, I was certain that Jeb was looking at me from my computer monitor. I jerked back from my monitor. I was offended for Jeb, who, in their tasteless desire for page views, had decided it was appropriate to put that image on their website. I slammed my laptop closed and left the room. I even considered calling the local paper to voice my disgust to their editor. I resolved to do this. But when I returned to the webpage a few hours later, the image displayed was a school picture of a smiling young boy with dark brown hair and a gap-toothed grin. In the moment, I had reasoned that they must have changed it out of respect. Things didn't get better. Atticus became more and more withdrawn, and no longer asked me if Jeb could come inside to play. He avoided the subject pointedly, and when I asked the next day if Jeb still wanted to come inside, Atty just flattened his mouth and refused to answer me. That night, the whistling was outside his window again. Christine, too, started acting strangely. I started to find thick lines of salt on all our windowsills and in front of our doorways. When I asked Christine about them, she tried to act casually about it. "Just in case," she affirmed. "You don't cover the house in salt on a whim. What's going on?" She didn't respond immediately, but I pressed her. "What's going on?" "Did you know that a little boy got killed right near our house?" she asked me flatly. My heart sank into my stomach, and I looked away guiltily. "Yeah, I didn't want to scare you." "Okay, well now we've moved from Atticus has a creepy imaginary friend to a boy matching the name of Atty's imaginary friend was killed outside our house on the same day that Atty started seeing him." She took a breath. "Something's going on. Atty's room is always freezing, and I'm hearing whistling outside the house, and Why are you smiling? I forced a frown. Sorry, it's just nice to not feel like I'm going crazy. She waved her hand. You know you don't need to try and handle all of this stuff on your own. She shuddered. Something's happening with our son. We tried all the layman's tricks. She burned sage in the house and started calling priests to try and bless us. Despite everything, I couldn't help but feel silly doing things like that. Why would salt and sage and priests work? Yet they seemed to. Atticus didn't mention anything about Jeb for a long time, and in a week or two he started to come out of his shell again. The peace lasted for almost 2 weeks, but that ended when I heard a metallic crash from the back side of our house, and our motion detector was triggered, engaging the floodlights. I was still mostly asleep when I blindly tore through our kitchen to burst through the back door, but I knew with a sick feeling what the sound had been. Despite the stillness of the backyard, I knew that something was wrong. The crickets and insects were utterly silent, and our floodlight illuminated the sycamores in a jarring white light. The energy was tense and expectant, even though nothing was there. I didn't bother to scan the yard, but ran instead to the side of the house to confirm my suspicion about the source of the noise. Our cellar door gaped open, and the inside latch was torn apart and hanging uselessly. I had an unobstructed view of our basement steps, leading into the utter darkness beneath our house. Then a few things happened in quick succession. First, a sharp whistle wafted from the dark basement at the foot of the cellar steps. Before, the sound had been piteous and soft, as if the whistler had been shy and plaintive. Now, it was piercing and shrill with a terrible potency behind it. Second, the wooden steps leading from the basement to our kitchen shuddered violently as something sprinted furiously towards the kitchen door. Third, Atticus started wailing in terror. It took me no more than 3 seconds to get to Attie's room, where I found he and Christine huddled together on the bed with him screaming in terror. He was so distraught that he couldn't stop hiccuping, and between fits he would murmur, "He's so mad. What did you do?" We all looked at each other hopelessly as the temperature in Atticus's bedroom plummeted, caught together in this nightmare. All of us spent the night in the master bedroom with lines of salt laid down in front of every entrance and a Virgin Mary prayer candle sputtering on the shelf. I didn't sleep a wink. I couldn't, not with the sound of tiny footsteps pattering up and down our hallway all night long. Things haven't gotten any better. I asked Atticus if Jeb had told him what he wanted. The answer that Atticus gave leaves me with no doubt that he's in terrible danger. Jeb wants to play with me forever. Story 3. I was followed by the corpse of an angel. When I was a little younger, about 8-10 years ago, something completely unexplainable happened to me. I don't tell this story to anyone, mostly because up until earlier today, even I thought it wasn't real. I'm not sure what to do about it, or if there is anything I could do. So I thought to post here, maybe at least just to ease my head and hear what others think. Around high school time, I was a loser and complete shut-in. Most of my time during these formative teenage years, I'd just spend inside, playing games or listening to music and spacing out. Though I've always had a fond interest with photography, capturing life through brief screenshots is precious. Plus, it's fun and easy to do with just the average phone. So, occasionally, I would leave on my own to wander the woods at the end of our street. Gave me plenty of time alone to get fresh air and stretch as well as snap a bunch of pictures of mostly bugs, but other animals or plants I found pretty too. On one of these walks, I heard a very off-putting sound. It vibrated very quietly along the trees and in the surrounding area. Whilst I'm normally a very paranoid person, and I was certainly uneased by the presence of this noise, I thought I recognized it. From the distance I was to whatever was producing it. The sound vaguely resembled that of a pig. My thought was, maybe some livestock had escaped from a nearby farm or something. Whether I was right or not, it sounded hurt. The slow, agonized rattle, piercing the odd bird chirp or rustle of a branch falling. Then, I made a decision that would scar my life forever. I approached. If it was hurt, I wasn't just going to leave it to bleed to death or whatever. I know, circle of life and all that, but I was young and much dumber than I am now. I made a brief trek off the path to find the source of the noise and, hopefully, save it. Wading through a bramble bush that slightly cut my legs, I began to focus on the sound. Or, rather, the sound seemingly gave me no choice but to focus on it. No birds were chirping anymore, and aside from my movements, the rising repetitive groans were all I could hear. Everything from the leaves in the trees to the soft blowing winds fell still. Something felt off, and in my stomach I had a strong rising urge to turn back. But I didn't. The sound grew closer, and I hadn't ventured too far from the path. It wasn't deafening by any means, but the sound punched through the silence with now a twinge of desperation, like I needed to find it. Up until this very moment, I have never forgotten what I saw. In a ditch, just like any other, surrounded by trees and leaf litter, but completely devoid of life. Something indescribable. The closest resemblance I could give you is it was similar in shape and size to whale carcasses that wash ashore, a messy pile of color and rotting substances. Except there were so many materials, so many different textures I simply couldn't identify. There was no discernible body shape or figure. It merely looked as if you had fused together parts of every animal alive and draped a cloth over top of the result. It was warping constantly. I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. I simply couldn't understand what this was. What confused me the most was the smell, or rather, lack of one. The environment smelt just fine. The leaves and earthy natural scent, as if this thing in front of me wasn't even there. My heart began to thump a little. I'd never seen a dead body in person, obviously, so I had no clue if I was stumbling upon something I wasn't supposed to see. This wasn't what I was looking for, and the groaning sound was pulsating from it. On edge, the slightest sounds began to feel like spears of anxiety cutting straight through my chest. I fell back a little, caught myself and ran back to the path. No one was around, so I didn't care about keeping my composure, and I ran until I caught sight of home again. My mother was home and noticed me sweaty, shaky and on edge. "Home already? Your walks normally last a while longer," she inquired, with a very minor tone of concern. Yeah, just got a bit tired," I explained, as I still hadn't fully come to terms with what I'd seen and didn't feel that anyone in my family would think anything of it other than that I was losing my mind. She told me that food was being prepared and wouldn't be very long, but I returned to my room swiftly and collapsed face first onto my bed. I pondered for a while over what it could have been and came to the conclusion of an art project. It had no scent, so perhaps it was a sculpt with sound effects for a film. The indescribable mass being man-made brought me enough comfort to slow my heart rate for the time. For a brief duration, nothing else happened. I refused to return to the woods for a while, so I had no more encounters with whatever it was. Purely so that I could continue to convince myself that it was nothing more than a creative pursuit. That didn't last for very long, though, cozy and warm in bed, I was scrolling my phone absent-mindedly. I hadn't thought about the thing all day, as I had spent it hanging out with friends outside of school. The slight buzz of my bedside lamp, the busyness of the kitchen downstairs, the slow, creeping ringing in my ears as everything fell silent, then that haunting, slow rasping seeping under the crack of my door. The drawn-out groan pushed its way into my room, my only safe place. I could listen to nothing else. I could think of nothing else as I watched a shadow slowly stretch along the floor, invading the dim light. My eyes grew wide and fearful. I clutched my phone as if it was my last hope, and I shuffled out of bed to avoid being caught off guard. If I needed to run, I could run. The doorknob turned, muted by the great harrowing moans. The door creaked open, drowned out still by the desperate sounds of that nightmarish sight. The doorway opened, giving way to a strange light. It flooded my room as if bright yet pervasively infected each corner of my vision with darkness. In a swift, jarring movement, a mass stretched out from behind the obscurant surface, like skin being pulled from someone's body to create the mockery of a head. It had the same damn warping textures as the thing I found in the woods. It had no other features and was merely a protruding clump of moving substances. Except, somewhere within the shifting motion, I could pick out a face, one with a deep, haunting gaze. It was as if its eyelids had been peeled back and fused into the skin above and below its eye sockets, unprotected orbs that only stared and stared. Similarly, deep holes, where the nose had been pushed back into its head and once again fused into its undefined, formless mass. It had no mouth. All it could do was emit muffled cries as it stretched and quivered in place. I blinked. "Hun, we're going out for a little to get some shopping done. We'll be back soon. Love you," my mother called out, as I watched her slip back through the door. That vision, that thing had vanished instantly, but its presence remained. A few days later, I had calmed down once again, thinking I must have hallucinated from a lack of sleep after panicking over the thing I'd seen. The bell rung for the 6th time in the day, and I headed to art class. I sat by my friend, Alex, with a slight uneasy shiver in my body. I tried to brush it off, and we joked a little in murmurs as the teacher rambled on. Toward the end of the subject, as we were doing practical work in the form of paintings, when the bell rang a little earlier than I'd expected, I turned my face to see how everyone else was responding to it. They'd all turned to me, too, blank, staring faces, even Alex, even the teacher, everyone. In an immediate fit of panic, I jolted out of my seat, slamming my knees on the desk. I winced in pain, but still, their eyes followed me perfectly. I shuffled past people, wobbling a little from hurting my knees, and bolted out of the classroom. Things just kept happening, and I didn't know why. Through the hallways, that growing darkness began to appear, before I burst out into the courtyard. There, a slow rattling groan awoken in my ears again. I was becoming extremely familiar and recognized it immediately. Tears began to roll out of my eyes as I screamed, trying to drown out the sound. But it didn't work. It grew louder and louder, deafening my surroundings. I opened my eyes wide again to see a huge, limp mass in front of me, shapeless and constantly contorting. It had no identifiable features beyond the shifting, unknown textures and colors. Taller than it was wide, I tried to see where a head should be on a human, but once again, just a repulsive slurry that I couldn't understand. But it was looking at me. It was looking at me, watching, staring, observing anywhere I moved I could not hide. The sound began to hurt, the pulsing, rising groan of misery that pained me. I screamed once more, clutching my head. Alex grabbed my arm violently. "Hey!" he questioned, worriedly. I let go of myself and looked up. My classmates all turned to look at me, but no longer staring. They were whispering amongst themselves. Then the bell rang, and the teacher awkwardly hurried to move everyone out. I looked back down shakily, very faint bloodstains where I had clasped my ears, and everything felt a little quieter. Alex offered to take me to the medical office, and I was far too exhausted to refuse. He had to return to classes after the break, but I was too shaken up to even speak. So they let me stay a little longer, and I was sent home shortly after. I went home and stayed quiet. I was drained. I lay there, appreciating the precious silence of my room. School had just finished, and I received a text from my friends. We shortly arranged to go on a walk together through the woods to help me feel better. I wanted to show them what I'd been seeing. Though my parents were hesitant, they allowed it since my friends, Alex and May, would be there. They arrived, and we set off toward the woods. But I directed them to the specific section I had ran out from. I didn't want to be out here longer than I needed to be. We arrived at the spot, but the sounds weren't there anymore. Maybe it was because of my slightly dulled hearing. But there was nothing. Desperate to convince myself I was still sane, I hurried them off the path. "No, there's something here you need to see," I began, immediately turning and stumbling in the direction of where I'd seen it. Alex was less hesitant than May, but both eventually followed. "If you say so." "What is it anyway?" Alex asked. "I don't know," is all I could respond with. He turned to May with confusion, who anxiously shrugged back. I stepped over the bramble bush again, making sure not to cut myself on it like before. Still, nothing. The ditch was there. There was a clear indication that something had filled this space due to the unnatural scatter of leaves around it. But it just wasn't there. It was here before, I cried out, as much as it freaked me out. I was hoping for any sign that I was overreacting. The leaves? The trees? What are we looking at here? Alex chipped in. I turned to him with a dreary hopelessness. His expression fell a little. Why don't we just head back onto the trail for now? May called. I gave in, slowly returning to the path. Since it wasn't there, maybe I had nothing to fear traveling through the woods again. But there it was. The distant, faint sound of a hurt animal groaning in slow, painful misery. You guys hear that? Alex commented. Immediately, I snapped with fear. Yes. I didn't know what to do. My legs began to shake again and my vision was blurring as the sound grew closer. But we weren't moving this time. I ran. I couldn't help myself. I think Alex or May called out to me just before I did, but I couldn't stop. The further I ran, the sound never faded, but it never grew. Only when I reached my home did it disappear. I ripped open the door, slammed it shut and ran straight up to my room. I didn't wait to take my shoes off or hear what my mother had to say. I buried myself in my pillow and cried. Later that night, they both texted in our group chat, frustrated that I pulled a weird prank like that, expressing how worried and concerned they were. I stopped going to school for the rest of the week as my ears had both become infected and hard to hear out of. It was irritating as hell, so I was more than happy to lay in bed all day. This last part is a little hazy to me due to the actions I took at the end. Most of this is missing details, but this night specifically, I have desperately tried to block out of my memory. It wasn't until recently it came back to me in pieces. I remember my whole family was out for various reasons. My parents were both working late shifts, and my sister was having a sleepover at her friend's. I was especially anxious already because of my situation, so I crawled out of bed and clumsily headed downstairs. I poured a very shallow bowl of cereal. When that familiar sound kicked up again, I was taking absolutely no chances, dropping the bowl on the counter and rushing to lock everything I could. Every single door, every single window, up until the very last one. I turned, jittery and terrified. Something was there. The front room's secondary window, a smaller, more ornate patterned window compared to the large glass pane in the center of the wall. Through the textured glass, I saw it. I was face to face with an angel. A stretched, warping face with the familiar peeled eyes and nose. We locked eyes and it immediately slipped away unnaturally. I could hear nothing, but I locked the window as fast as possible and nearly tripped, skidding back to the stairs. The sound grew louder yet again, louder than it had been, making my ears burn with searing agony. Nowhere was safe. I hadn't locked this thing out. I had caged myself in for it. My panic grew as my heart beat faster. I rushed into the bathroom as I heard the door downstairs very slowly creaking open without the slightest resistance from the locks. I ripped open the medicine cabinet and darted back to my room with sleeping pills in hand. I knew this was it for me. I had an unexplainable feeling, just as indescribable as the formless carcass that was coming for me. I didn't want to be there when it happened. Last I remember, I finally smelt it approaching. A hideous mesh of ash and rotten meat. The smell permeated my room as my eyes began to shudder. I could feel the physical pain of them kicking in. I was already exhausted, and I don't know if I fell asleep quickly or if I just blocked out most of before I did. I awoke a week later. My parents were in tears, wondering why I'd ever tried to take my own life and wishing that I'd spoken to them. For 10 long years, my story has ended there. A crazy drug trip from trying to take my own life. Just yesterday, I checked my phone's old storage to see what was on there, and I saw a video I didn't recognize. It was dark blue and grainy. A few minutes in, however, a door in the background opens. Light flickers in, illuminating me, asleep. 20 long minutes follow. 20 long minutes of raspy, death rattles in the cold, lifeless stare of the corpse of an angel watching over me. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.